Mingalaba. My name is Dr. Tin Tin. I am a Burmese American retired physician, also a Dharma teacher in California. Well, during this time of great stress and anxiety, when we are faced with a worldwide pandemic, of course, there is a lot of fear, a lot of stress, and trying to keep oneself getting the virus, and also looking at our family, the safety of our family, safety of oneself. Um, I know there's a lot of issues that plague you know people all over the United States and the world, but let me generally talk about how we can affect the world around us, or how the environment affects us. Okay, let's go to this pandemic issue of the worldwide viruses that's traveling at lightning speed almost. Of course, you know, countries had to try to contain the infection within their boundaries and so on, and there's all kinds of issues coming up that people get all fired up or get depressed. Well, anyway, if we look at the the practicality of it, is it always comes down to me and mine, what I can do for myself. Okay, because the crisis, all countries are in a crisis mode, and how much we can influence leaders, policymakers, so on, at this moment is minimal, because this is a very in this crisis duration, the policymakers will do their work. Whether it is right or wrong is another matter. But it all, well, you know, there's a saying that when the cows come home, it's me here, sitting here. That's where I can do a lot for myself. The next level is your family, your neighbors, and so on. But the crux of the matter is me right here. Now, of course, we have to look at whether me and mine, is that selfishness? In general terms, general times, yes, that is so. But now, during the crisis, I would call this a rational selfishness. Rational because without preservation of me here, you know, who is going to take care of me, right? We can't expect the hospitals, the doctors, they are doing whatever they can with whatever they have. And it's not complete, even this is United States, America. But we are seeing, in the news that hospitals are inadequate, doctors will be overwhelmed, so on and so forth. Okay, so it all comes down to me and mine, here, right now. What can I do for myself to prevent myself getting sick or even death? Of course, we are looking at death in our face. I'm not an alarmist, okay? I'm a doctor of public health, retired doctor of public health. So there is a reality that's 100% based on, solid scientific facts. And so, okay, now let's look at what do I do now? You know, how do I preserve myself? How do I save myself? Now, in order to be able to do that, we cannot panic. I mean, of course, people do panic. I'm not, criticizing them. But in reality, in practical terms, every one of us who have the risk of the virus infection, need to have a very centered mind. It comes down to that. Because a person's mind, if it is not centered and grounded in the moment, now you can be thrown off your horse anytime with all kinds of news, bombarded, on that you are following and so on, or hearing from others around you. So whatever it is, you know, it is what I generally call trying to be able to center oneself in the moment. Without that, the mind will be going off this way, that way, going round and round in circles and getting all tied up and getting all anxious and worries. And it becomes, that's a little pandemic in oneself. Okay? It's a mental pandemic if we allow that. And so, what I can offer through this talk, because I am a teacher of mindfulness practice from the Theravada tradition, I can offer some kind of mental exercises that will help, some of you in the audience, if you will, are interested in learning this way to reduce stress so that you can go about in your everyday life in a calm and commonsensical way. Because the mind that is very active and full of worries and anxiety, it is very easy to lose the commonsensical thinking. I mean, that's a natural state. I'm not decrying anybody if you're in a frenzy, but the frenzies are also, these are life-saving mental states. The frenzy is also a life-saving means that how we save our lives is the fight and flight kind of response. But there are drawbacks in this fight and flight response because they reduce our ability to think in a common sense mode. Okay? Because right now, what we need is to be able to think and deduce common sense solutions to our lives, to our living, everyday living. Okay? Now, so let me talk again. Go back to how do we center ourselves. Okay? So in the Buddhist traditions or other traditions like yoga and TM, uh, the Christians have their prayers, contemplative prayers, which is also a centering mental activity. We can use any of these centering activities, but because my training is from Theravada Buddhism, which is popularly known as mindfulness practice, the centering actually, yeah, there is a meditation, tradition in the Theravada tradition, but there are two kinds of mindful meditation practice. One is particularly designed to center the mind, which is called the samatha practices. And there are 40 types of samatha practices, but we don't have to digress about it. But very popular with Asians as well as Asian Buddhists as well as the Westerners is the centering practice of, for example, like watching the breath. Okay? That's one very popular practice that's all over the world. Even little kids in the classrooms are doing it. So what does it mean? How does watching the breath helps to center ourselves. You see, normally our mind is flittering about so much, what Zen Buddhists call, and Buddhism calls it a monkey mind, jumping from one thing to another, to another, to another. So the centering, which in the Buddhist term is called samadhi, a building up samadhi, is to bring the mind to one pointed focus using either the body or sound or touch, the smell. There's all kinds of modalities out there. Of course, the easiest is the breath because it's here. You can't stop breathing. You're always breathing non-stop, and it's available at any point in time. It's available anywhere you go because you are not going to stop breathing, right? And so that is one of the best centering, what we in Buddhism we call object of meditation. So the watching the breath, okay, going in and out, in and out. So that's using the touch in the nostrils with the air touching the nostrils, in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. So because it is a tangible sense of touch, that the centering is very much easier than trying to figure out, what things that we can use. But of course, once you got this idea of with the breath going in and out, which you can do even with your eyes open, So, I teach and practice mindfulness in everyday life without the silent sitting, without closing the eyes. And so I want to bring this practice to a lot of people because while you're moving through the day, even in your home, and if your mind is running around and getting all worried and tied up, you can just sit for a while, a few minutes, or 1 minute even. So even 1 nanosecond, that will stop the mind running around for a few nanoseconds. 1 nanosecond of watching your breath, of feeling your breath on the nostrils, will stop the mind a few nanoseconds of running around. Okay? So if these nanoseconds are added up, so for example, you do it for 5 minutes, you may not be able to be focusing totally on your breath for exactly all the time for 5 minutes. You can only do 1 nanosecond. Okay, that's good enough because that breaks the momentum of the mind running around. Okay, but of course it'll go away and come back. The thoughts will go away, run around, then it'll come back to the breath. That is all we need in the beginning. So to start, that's a very soft landing. Okay? And so now let me elaborate a little bit on how I started to learn the practice in Burma. It's about 55 years ago. I was at the Mahasi Center. A lot of American practitioners of mindfulness must have been by now students of Jack Cornfield or Sharon Salzberg or Joseph Goldstein, who studied in Burma, trained in Burma, and came back and started their own centers here, and are very popularly known, and they are the forerunners of bringing mindfulness practice to the United States. Okay, now I also went to Mahasi, the main center where they trained, maybe about the same time that they were training in Burma. But then uh, I had a different teacher from their teachers. Their teachers is, I mean, some people, Americans would know Upandita was their main teacher, who was a very, very one of the foremost masters from the Mahasi tradition. But when I went to practice study there, it was only 1 hour a Sunday, and so it's a weekly session. But that session was taught by an old monk called U Zawana. He, of course, has passed away a long time ago, and he was probably Chinese, Burmese, and very jovial, very open, and he was highly educated in the Western vernacular sense. And so and I was quite surprised because he was he was allowing us. You can use any kind of centering practice, not necessarily the classical Mahasi method. The Mahasi method actually was to feel the rising and falling of the abdomen, and and then the teaching there, the training was pretty strict by any standard, and you have to really focus on that. That's You can't stop. You have to do it until uh, your bones creak or your blood scream. Okay, uh, and they get it somewhere. But then this very senior monk was not didn't approach it in that rigid way. He would say, "Oh, that's fine. You can focus or use any practice, meditation practice that you're used to. You don't have to follow the Mahasi way." So I was very glad, because my experience with the breath, focusing on the breath. And so we started in that way. And the um, outstanding training with him, which really spoke to me, and I felt very deeply, um, what do you call, uh, connected with it, was because he said, okay, you can focus on the breath, and don't worry if your mind goes off, okay? He said, it will always come back to the breath. So he said, just don't force yourself. You don't have to be rigid about it. When your mind strays to another area or thoughts, it's okay. Just try to remember where you went. Try to be aware of where your mind went, and then it will just come back to the breath. Uh, and he said, don't force it. Just follow where your mind went. That's all he said. And so I started practicing with him the first 1 hour there. I found even during that 1 hour, okay, my mind went out, and I suddenly would realize, oh yeah, I'm out here. And automatically the mind comes back very quickly to the breath. And as the hours start to evolve, I could see that the going out was getting less and less. I mean, it's the distance becomes less and less. So it was more obvious after like 2, 3 sessions that the going out was, it went out less and less. It means the distance between the mental distance between the mind out there and back to the breath was getting less and less. And so the number of leaving the breath was reduced, as well as the time that you spend ruminating going out was also reduced. It was so coming closer and closer to the breath. And so, but unfortunately, I was able to go there only for 4 or 5 sessions, because the uh, the what do you call, my older friend who was taking me, accompanying me to the center, couldn't make it, and so that was about 5 years ago, and during those days, the meditation practices were not as popular as now in Burma, where now it's, everybody is starting to go to the centers, monasteries to practice, whether they are male or female, young or old. But those days it was impossible. You have to be accompanied by a companion. You can't go alone as a young woman. And so I stopped going. But the exciting experience I had was, um, even when I'm going about during the day, not really focusing on the breath, I found that, like, my feelings, I could see them, aware. I mean, actually, it was awareness. I became very aware of my feelings. And as soon as I'm aware, the feelings will drop away. And that really excited me because um, the I didn't know at that time that this was a centering practice, okay? That I was getting more centered in my life. And that was a really very freeing experience, and it helped me cope with a lot of difficulties and, problems in my life in a much more with much more clarity and peace of mind. So I would like, the audience to try it out. Okay, you're hearing my voice now. That's a hearing uh, meditation. So you can try this. You are hearing my voice. Now I will stop for a few seconds and see where your mind goes. Okay. Okay. Now, Susan, can I ask you? Okay, Susan, now you're hearing my voice, right? Now I'm going to stop. And during that time, tell me where your mind went. Okay? I mean,
I think I was with my breath.
oh, good. That's good. Yeah, I wasn't. So that's a natural propensity,
Mm-hmm.
you see. That's the determining point of what works best for you.
Mm-hmm.
So have you ever meditated on the breath? No.
Just now,
Just,
as you were explaining it.
right. Yeah. So it's an so it seems that that's an affinity that you have with
Mm-hmm.
your breath. So that's would be your nice modality that you can adopt if you want to stabilize your mind
Mm-hmm.
at any moment during the day, and you didn't have to close your eyes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. No.
Mm-hmm. So can you describe your experience with coming to the breath?
It was very peaceful. Um, it was natural
Yeah,
to go to the breath.
right. Yeah, that's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your mind was not moving away from the breath.
Mm-hmm.
It was right there with the
Mm-hmm.
breath. Yeah. So that's being centered. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is an example I wanted to show, the audience that uh, it is possible to center yourself by watching your breath, by being aware of the breath without closing your eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can use it everywhere, at the supermarket, while you're driving. Well, not so much in driving because you want to focus. I'm sorry. I have to apologize. Even then, when you're in a crisis, while you're driving, somebody is cutting in front of you and you get angry. Yeah, you can go back to the breath too. Just as I said just now, 1 nanosecond is all you need. Right? And that is the beginning of the road to being more centered. Is there anything you want to ask, Susan?
If you're finding it hard to go to your breath, what do you do?
You know what? I've done this for some of my students. There are a few things you can do. You can say 1, 2, 3 to yourself in silence. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Or you can just use your hands. Just rub it, in a way that's, you know, that's also a meditation practice of touch. Okay? The 1, 2, 3 in your mind is your mental object. You're using your mental thoughts to center yourself. And, when I first started to meditate, when I get anxious or something is, going on in my life that's worrisome or I'm in a crisis, I didn't realize that I was automatically wiping down the countertop. Only a few minutes later, I became conscious of I was wiping down vigorously. Whether it was clean or unclean doesn't matter. I was just, that was my modus operandi. I know it is very weird, but of course I have got over it. So there you may find that there are some unconscious way of centering for you, and use that. Okay, later on you find yourself if if you're stressed out and so on, you can always take up a rag and or wipe down your iPhone if you're talking on the iPhone. Okay, so let's go back to, all right, the centering, what does it do? Now you can ask me. The centering will help you to stabilize the mind so that, like say anxiety, the softest emotional states that we will find during these difficult times is anxiety. All right, if you are centering yourself through your breath or other means that we are just talked about, it will displace the anxiety even for a few moments. But don't give up hope just because your mind goes back to being anxious, because this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It has to have an intention on the part of yourself that you want to do it. Without that intention, nothing will happen. You go back to this old rigmarole of anxiety, fear, panic, so on, obsession. It'll just escalate. But if there is an intention, that intention needs to be put into action. What action? A decision making. You must decide that, okay, I am going to practice awareness. I am going to practice mindfulness to help myself. So that decision is very critical. Intention in Buddhism is the description of karma. Karma is your action, the present action right now. And the karma can be mental, it can be verbal, it can be action-oriented. So for mindfulness practice, the intention or decision is mental. You have to have a mental output that decides that, okay, I'm going to try. And you can always discard this practice if it doesn't work for you. There's no binding. Nobody can bind you. Yeah, you're not under a training course with me, okay? This is just a very casual, conversation with you and myself. Right? Okay, so that decision is very critical because that decision programs your own mind. See, the mind is so programmable. It's like a amazing computer. Right? But computer, you always have to do a keying in. You have to touch a key, key in something to make it work, to make it run. The same thing with the mind. You have to key in a decision. Then only the mind absorbs it and makes it its own. And it will remind you automatically, because it's like putting in a new software. Of course, but the software is, the computer is different to brain or mind, is that when you put in a software, okay, you just have to run it. You touch a key and it runs by itself. Well, the brain is not actually a computer. It's a brain. It's made up of organic cells. But it is programmable. But for the program to be established, we have to repeat it over and over and over. So, to watch your breath or to watch your mind, any kind of meditative practice, we have to repeat the action over and over. The action may be, the mind, or it can be your hands rubbing each other when you're stressed out. So all these are programmable activities of the mind or the body. Okay? So the more you repeat it, the more it becomes programmed. Let me go into a bit of neuroscience. It's not going to be a lot because I'm not a neuroscientist either. But this is the mind that can be transformed. Now neuroscientists are finding out that the neural circuit can be changed, right, by a willful changing, intentional change. So when you repeatedly change the circuit, it becomes automatic. That's when the brain also becomes programmed. And so that's exactly the same with, what we're doing can be explained through our neural networks. So when you change the neural networks, it becomes habituated. Like I've had students at my center, I've been teaching at the center. Started my center 20 years ago. So I've had a lot of local students. They come and go, but then when I meet them in town, they say, Dr. Tien, I can't stop practicing now. Why? They hadn't come back. A lot of them didn't come back, but they said, I can't stop practicing now. Why is that? That is because the software is in place now. The new software had been in place, even after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, see. So it might not be as clear as when they were training with me, but then it still comes back, probably at moments of stress. I'm sure it shows up its head, okay? And so that's why this practice is so useful. Like, for example, my daughter would say, Mom, when the children act up, she has two little kids, 5 years and 3. She would say, they stress me out so much, when they act up and so on. She said, I had to go back to the mindfulness practice to stabilize my mind. Otherwise, I'll be, going on fireworks, so on. So she's not a student per se with me, but she had sort of, practice with me off and on. So it does come back, because of that neural network. Shall we stop now for a little bit? Yeah. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.